I am Valentino Rossi.
May we reintroduce you to the 2009 Yamaha R1 and, Rossi.
Well, you know, the cars around here could mistake me for Valentino Rossi. We are quite similar, apart from looks, height, width, you know, all of that sort of stuff, which is not important. The fact is we're both humanoids, so they could mistake me for Rossi. Yeah.
When Yamaha announced this model in 2008, they promised something major, and everybody took note. After all, Yamaha were the ones who pretty much invented the modern 1000cc class in 1997, and the R1 has been dazzling ever since. So when the 2000 model was first unveiled, the world took a look at it and went, ew. While previous R1s were praised as mechanical sex symbols, the 2009 model looked like a frog that no amount of affection from a princess could save. It had weird googly eyes, a fat bottom, and a look of mild confusion. It got worse when people opened the throttle.
It's not fast. Well, it doesn't feel fast. Here's the thing. I mean, you put it into like low gear, you open the throttle. Okay. It makes a great sound. I mean, it sounds like a MotoGP bike, but you know, the other bikes at this time were all standing on the back wheel and bucking and weaving and shouting and screaming and all of that, and this bike just sort of did it. You open the throttle, you move forward, and nothing. You know, that's kind of it. It was a little bit disconcerting.
Racers at the time were worried as they turned their first laps on the Kermit R1. Despite a claim of 191 horsepower, it didn't feel fast at all. That figure just didn't seem to translate into speed. And yet, when they returned to the pits, the mechanics told them that they had just set a new lap record. So the new R1 didn't feel fast, but it was. And that was down to the new firing order caused by something called a cross-plane crank.
You see, up until this point, conventional motors fired like this. Boom, 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 boom. So regular. This one was a bit different. It went ba-boom, 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 ba-boom. And that made the motor much more usable, much more everything. And the person we have to thank for this is, in fact, the same guy whose signature is over here strangely close to your personal bits. Valentino Rossi.
Indeed, when Rossi made his sensational move to Yamaha in 2004, he tried a bunch of different motors, and the one he liked most was a surprise because it seemed to be the slowest. It was the cross-plane crank version. Needless to say, the doctor's instincts were correct because the motor won the championship in its first year. 5 years later, this crank made its way to the R1, and success continued because, in the hands of Ben Spies, it won its first World Superbike title.
The second time Yamaha won the World Superbike Championship was in the year 2021 with some Turkish guy named Top Shelf or something.
This pristine 2009 R1 comes from the showroom floor of Fire It Up and of course celebrates its godfather, Valentino Rossi, and that's perhaps a valuable thing.
So here's the thing that amazes me. This is a superbike, a real superbike for 120,000 Rand. It's only got 30,000 Ks on the clock, so it's basically brand new. Well, it's just run in at least. And it's still, I don't know, I feel like a collector's item of sorts. I mean, now that Rossi's retired, it's a bit like, you know, when a painter dies, so they're not making any more tributes. It's like a Barry Sheen tribute. You know, this is going to go up in value. I feel it's an investment.
Even without such optimistic thoughts, the R1 has always been a sure thing. Yamaha has never built a truly bad version of this bike, even in a modern electro-crazed, power-hungry world.
Look, this bike will not hold a candle to any of the modern bikes, but then again, a modern bike costs 3 times as much. And they're definitely not 3 times as good, I can tell you that much. Something about Yamaha, it's very roomy. I mean, I'd say this is nearly comfortable, actually. And, yeah, and it's a super bike. I mean, it's no fancy electronics. There's 3 riding modes and that's pretty much it. But I mean, a lot of people don't want that. They just want a cool super bike. They can just be cool, just be groovy, just have a good time on. And that's what this is. There's me being cool and groovy and having a good time. I like it very much. I like it very much.
I could not agree with Don more. Not only is that particular model of the R1 a great bike, the whole idea of these modern classic superbikes, for want of a better term, is a great way to get a special sport bike for a very reasonable price. And on that point quickly, although new bike prices may occasionally be pretty expensive by comparison with other countries, our second-hand pricing throws up a lot of really good value. Take this R1 for example, which at 120,000 rand and only 30,000 Ks is much better value than you would find here in France, for example. The most affordable comparable bike here I found is 160,000 rand, but they go all the way up to 180, 190 grand. Back to this R1, I know its looks are a bit Marmite, but I'm a fan and I think it's aged pretty well considering. It looks different, but not particularly old. And in the age we are, many superbikes have had something of a homogeneous look to them over the past decade or so. And this R1's individuality really works for it and sets it apart from the crowd. Don's test has really got me thinking about these kinds of bikes and the ones I'd love to have in my own garage, but not the obvious expensive models like the RC45 or even the RC30 or the original 916 Ducati, which, don't get me wrong, I would love to own, but their prices and availability make them the reserve of people with a lot more liquidity than me. Now, I'm thinking of those models that were freely available and were standout excellent at the time, or sort of sleepers where we didn't realise until later on quite how brilliant they were. Top of my list is my all-time favourite mainstream superbike, a sport bike with a short wheelbase, nimble, almost unstable handling. It was so agile for a litre class bike. A monster engine with power absolutely everywhere. It made me laugh and scream like a lottery winner every time I rode it. It turned me into a ridiculously reckless, wheeling, tank-slapping, risk-taking buffoon, whether I was on the road or at the track. It was the 2004 Kawasaki ZX-10R. It was basically the same in 2005, after which they changed it to the twin-exhaust wheelbarrow version, and they calmed everything down so much that they basically gave it a full frontal lobotomy, ripping away its character and making it that most dreadful of things, a sensible superbike. It was boring and I hated it. Whatever you do, don't buy that one secondhand. Even though it might ultimately turn a faster lap, it's just not fun. However, if you can't find the 0405 version, then go for the model after the wheelbarrow, which was available from 08 to 2010. Not as leery as the first one, but still full of character and with a look that has also aged pretty well. You won't be disappointed if you can find a good one. Actually, while we're talking Kawasaki, I might as well mention the ZX-7R and the Double R, which was a fancier version with some uprated bits and bobs and a ridiculously tall first gear, if I remember correctly. One of the best looking bikes Kawasaki ever made, and given some serious extra cool factor because Scott Russell made the shape a world superbike champion. And then that madman Australian Anthony Gobert came along and made sideways braking a thing with the same bike. You can pick these up for relatively reasonable money. They were all good and the model started in 1989, but I'm thinking specifically of the shape that appeared in 1996 and went on right through until 2003. And although obviously there's no electronics or ride modes or ABS, that's a plus because these are pure, unadulterated sport bikes before fuel injection even. So you just have to show them a bit more respect than you might a more modern sport bike. Right, Honda. I love the original 1992 Fireblade with its 16-inch front wheel, its agility for the time, the handling, and that twin headlight classic look and the holes in the fairing to help it change direction quicker. Yes! That innovation didn't last very long, did it? I remember when I first rode it in 93, I think it was. This was before I actually became a bike journalist. It was a mate's bike and I had a new liquid-cooled GSX-R 750 WN that I loved, and well, after riding the new blade, I didn't love it anymore. The Honda made my Suzuki feel like a cumbersome old touring bike. However, I've also ridden that blade since, and it's not like the original R1 or that ZX-10R. It only made about, I don't know, 127 horsepower or something, somewhere in there. And today that's just, well, it's just kind of average for an adventure bike, never mind a full-on superbike. But there is another Honda on my fantasy sport bike list, and that's the SP1, or RC51 it was in America. This was the V-twin they made to out Ducati for the World Superbike Championship, which, of course, they eventually did with the help of Colin Edwards. I have fond memories of that bike as well, though it wasn't the easiest bike to ride. Quite small, cramped even, a slightly odd riding position, perched kind of on and over the bike. It didn't flow on a track either. You sort of argued with it and forced it to do what you wanted it to do, but the engine was impressive, if a little top-endy. It was still a wheelie beast though. Mind you, everything in those days was a wheelie beast. There was no wheelie control, so no faffing around with electronics and a load of buttons to ruin the spontaneity of an impromptu mono off the top of a crest in the road or out of a slow turn or something. That bike arrived in 2002 and then became the SP2 a couple of years later, and it was all over by 2006 because the World Superbike rules changed and you could race 1000cc four-cylinder bikes, and that meant Honda could run the Fireblade. So it had a relatively short production run, which can make finding a clean, low mileage one quite difficult, but definitely worth it if you can find yourself one. I could mention Suzuki's GSX-R 1000, I suppose, but I generally preferred the Kawasaki's and Yamahas of the time. If you want a Suzuki, then the GSX-R 750 is a good bet. You can still get it in some markets, new, but most of them are brilliant, and the best ones to go for would obviously, but expensively, be the original 1985 slab-sided version that made 100 horsepower and was arguably the first sort of full-on race replica. I wouldn't bother with the other cradle framed versions like the ones I had, so look for anything from 1996 onwards. The one with the duck arse end on it and the SRAD designation. Great engine, brilliant handling, and it's basically been that same sort of recipe for the past 15 or 16 years. But Suzuki fans are no doubt yelling at their screens now, but don't worry, I would never ever dare to forget the TL1000, the S and the R. The S came first in 1997, had a half fairing, lovely V-twin engine, came in red, so you could be a Ducati, but affordably. Earned itself a bit of a reputation as a widow maker because of its supposed propensity to tank slap you off the road, though I have to say I never experienced that, but I definitely did, on the other hand, on a few GSX-R 750s over the years. Really fun bike that was joined by the R a year later with a full fairing that was designed like the SP1 to out V-twin the Italians. It wasn't as successful as the Honda, only taking a single World Superbike victory, so the factory went back to the GSX-R 750. The S ended its production run after only 4 years in 2001, and in 2003 it was last orders for the R as well. Like the SP1, there's consequently less of these about, but a well cared for example of either bike would make a fine addition to any fantasy garage. Okay, I've got to stop now. There's undoubtedly plenty of other models you wish I'd mentioned, so go to our YouTube channel and let us know about them in the comments.